in the SLC series of webinars to help you get to the IELTS score that you need. So let me first of all just start by sharing the screen with you. I'll share my PowerPoint for today. And we can start looking at today's topic, which is, I've entitled it Making Sense of the Numbers, because we're looking at Task 1 writing. Task 1 writing, as you're no doubt aware, needs a lot of writing connected with numbers and data. So let's have a look at the type of thing we need. The writing section of the IELTS test is divided into two parts, or tasks. We call them Task 1 and Task 2. Today, we're looking at Task 1, and we're going to see what that entails. But first of all, some questions for you. What I'd like from you, a little bit of input in the chat boxes. Could you just let me know how long is the whole of the writing section in IELTS? So if you could put that on the chat now. Not getting any chat. I'll no doubt be able to read lots and lots of them later. I'm sure you're all typing in. There was a lot of input last week, or a couple of weeks ago when we did the last one. So how long is the writing section? I'm sure you all know it's 60 minutes long, 1 hour. That covers both tasks. We'll have Task 1 and Task 2 to do within that 1 hour. So what is the minimum number of words required in Task 2? Okay, yeah, so 250 in Task 2, and in Task 1, is that the same or different? Okay, in Task 1, 150. So does anyone know the recommended time that we should spend on each task? How long should we spend on Task 1, for example? And on Task 2? Okay. So on Task 1, recommended that we spend 20 minutes. On Task 2, 40 minutes. Now, it doesn't take a mathematical genius to work out that what we need to do, Task 1 is worth approximately half of Task 2. Or in other words, Task 2 is worth twice as much as Task 1. I'd like you to remember these words. Remember how this sentence is worded. We're going to need it later. So let's recap. Task 1, 20 minutes, 150 words. It's worth 33.3, or 1/3 of the marks. Task 2, 40 minutes, 250 words. That's worth 66.7 of the mark, or 2/3. This sentence above, we can work out that Task 1 is worth approximately half of Task 2. Or looking at it from the other angle, Task 2 is worth twice as much as Task 1. That's important. We need to work out and be clear in our minds how this sort of sentence works. This is the only thing which is holding some of you back from 6.5 to band 7 or 7.5. I've seen some beautifully written Task 1 reports, but if they don't use some sort of comparative statement a couple of times in the report, if they don't use language of comparison, you'll lose marks. It's sad because it's so easy for some of you to get to 7, but if you don't use this sort of sentence, you cannot reach there. It's very specific in the examiner's criteria that you must use comparative language. Okay, so how much of the writing mark is given for each task? Well, it's 1/3, 2/3. So do we spend a lot of time on task 1? No. 20 minutes would be fine. What sort of things do we need to write about? So, types of question. All task 1 questions, to some degree or another, give information to you, or some data to you, and they require you to write a report. Sometimes they say a report for a university lecturer or for an educated person, that sort of thing. And the way that information or data is given to you is very, very variable. You can see any of the following. You can see line graphs, bar charts, pie charts, maps, process flowcharts, life cycle diagrams, or tables. Well, you probably know what some of these look like, but let's go through and see some typical examples, and I'll point out some of the features and things you would have to do for each of these styles of question. Mainly you will get graphs or tables, occasionally some of the more exotic questions come up. We have to cover them, or the day you go for your exam, these will be the type of question which is there. And if we haven't told you about them, you won't be able to answer them. But they're rare. They only occupy perhaps 10 or 15% of the types of task 1. So let's have a look at what these actually mean graphically. They say that a picture tells 1,000 words. So I've got lots of visual aids in this PowerPoint this week, because this, I think, is the most visual of the tasks that you need to do in the day of the exam. So let's have a look. So here we have a line graph. It's not a particularly complicated one. It's got 4 different plots on it, 4 different lines. You can see that it's telling us something about price. It's got dollars in millions, so millions of dollars, and the scale goes from 0 to 2,500 millions, so that'd be 2.5 billion, wouldn't it? So this is for the financial year ending 30th of June. On each of the years we see along the bottom, so the years from 2012 to 2022. Now that's important. Is it 2022 yet? No. So here we'd have to think about tense if we were writing a graph with this one. Some of it is in the past, some of it's looking towards the future. So our tense would change at the year now. From point now, we'd have to talk about there was or there has been. And looking towards the future, we'd have to talk about predicted figures, or there will be, or it is thought that, or predictions indicate. Vocabulary like this. So what can we see at a quick glance at a graph like this? Well, rates, revenue, and user charges, they just seem to go up and up, don't they? They're not getting any less. There was a slight slowdown of the rates revenue in 2012, 2013, but not very much. Most of the time they're onwards and upwards. So the trend there is upwards, an upwards trend. Slightly more changed with borrowings and grants and subsidies. They actually cross at one point. Grants and subsidies overtake borrowings in 2016. And then in the future, grants and subsidies, after reaching this peak in 2016, they drop down gradually until 2022. They're at just above the 2012 levels. Borrowings, however, are much more up and down, or variable. There are fluctuations in this one. We can see what looks like a mountain, and in fact we call it a peak So there's a peak in 2020, so that would be predicted. We cannot know that yet, but from information they have on hand, this is their best idea for what 2020 will look like. So the wording would be something like, in 2020, there will be a peak at around, what would it be, $1,400 million, before dropping back down and leveling out in 21-22. So trends on that one, you could say the borrowings line fluctuates, the grants and subsidies peaks and then gradually subsides. So that's a fairly typical sort of graph. You might have 3 lines, occasionally just 2. There are not that many different points or plots on it. There are only about 10. So fairly easy to understand that one. Let's have a look at another. Here we've got a bar chart. And this one is showing us gross domestic product from IT and service industry of the UK as a percentage of GDP. Gross domestic product again. They've used the shortened form. So you've got 2 colors on this graph, some blue and some purple. The key at the bottom tells us that the lighter blue one is IT and the purple one is service industry. Here we've got some years. We've got 92, 94, 96, 98, 2000. Well, this is not every year. They're doing every second year. And what is it showing us? Is this dollars? No, it tells us it's a percentage. So this is figures as a percentage of gross domestic product. So what trends can we see in this one? Well, at first glance, it looks as if both of them continue going upwards all the time. But oh, look carefully. Have a look at IT industry for 94 and 96. 96 is slightly less, not much, but it does drop there. So there's something which is certainly worth mentioning. So overall, there's an upward trend. However, in 1996, there was a slight drop back. There was no growth. In fact, the figure dropped back slightly. Then if we have a look at service industry, they're all one above the other. That progresses. But the trend is not so high. The IT industry is going ahead rapidly. The service industry, it is increasing, but not at such a fast speed. So we'd be able to talk about that one. We'd certainly mention where the IT industry dropped back slightly rather than went ahead. And we'd do some comparisons. We would talk about how far ahead it was. So from 1996 in IT, you see that's just under 8%. And just 2 years later, it's up at 12%. So that's a huge drop when you consider that's the gross domestic product of the whole country. So that sort of rise would be worth mentioning. I think that's the biggest one on the graph, isn't it? A whole 2%. Other places we've got just under 1.5%, about 1.3% there from 96 to 2000. And the largest jump on IT would probably be from 92 to 94, where it goes just over 1% or 2%, isn't it? Just over 2% higher between 92 and 94. So similar sort of thing is happening here. This bar chart is showing us change from 1992 to 2000. We've got 2 plots on this one, IT and service industry. Again, fairly easy to see visually what's happening. They're both going up, IT faster than service industry, except for this little dip in 96 where it came down slightly. Okay, let's move on, look at another type of diagram to give us the data. Pie chart. I like the word pie chart. It describes it exactly. It is like a pie or a pizza. And here's a slice. So what have we got? Browser usage for April 2012. Browser, what is that? Maybe we don't know what a browser is. Here's a little clue at the side. Internet Explorer, Firefox, Chrome, Safari, and Opera. Now we know it's the thing you use to look at pages on the World Wide Web, an internet browser. Okay, and what is this browser usage for April? Let's have a look around. If I look at the whole of the chart, that's 100%. So the whole of the chart 100, and we're split into percentages. The biggest percentage, 38.3, Chrome. I use Chrome on my computer, that seems likely. The next one, Firefox. Oh, I don't use Firefox. This has come as a surprise to me. That's at 35, not far between. Pretty similar, 35.8% as opposed to 38.3. Within 2 or 3 points there, isn't it? And the third largest, Internet Explorer. And then we go down to the smaller ones, Safari and Opera at 4.5 and 2.3. So this tells me that this was the data for April in 2012. Only one time. So a pie chart can't tell us things from 1992 to 2000. It's not like that. The pie chart gives us information about a point in time, 1 point. We'll come back to that later. We'll have a little look at when we're comparing things. So that's pie charts. Sometimes they're not as easy to see. This is a nice colorful one. Sometimes they're shaded in black and white. And be careful that you're comparing or naming the correct label. Sometimes you have to look carefully to see what shading it is. But this is a nice colorful one. Hopefully the one you see will be as clear as this to work out. So let's have a look at another way of giving you the data. Here we've got 2 islands. You can see the palm trees on these islands. And we've got before and after. Before and after what? I can see. Okay, in before, there wasn't much there. If we have a look at that, there are a few palm trees and a beach. I can't see any buildings at all. So this is an island which afterwards looks very different. So the after picture, there's a restaurant, a reception, accommodation, a pier. It looks like it's become some sort of holiday area, holiday resort. And they've done some roads and tracks on the island too. So here we don't know when it was, but sometime in the past, there was nothing there. After, which we can presume is up to today, this is now, after this period of time, we have a development, a place for people to go on holiday. There's a reception, accommodation, and somewhere to eat, and something to do, beach, swimming, exploring the island, that sort of thing. And I guess there's vehicles on the island because it says vehicle track, so there must be some sort of transport to get you around. So the thing we have to do here is, well, the comparison is easy. The whole thing is about comparing what it was before and what it was after. So we would say there was just a few palm trees. Now there has been a restaurant built in the north of the island. In the central western area of the island, we've built a reception building has been built. And around a series of tracks, some accommodation blocks, and you could count them. You could say there were 6 to the west of the reception. I'm presuming that north is up. It usually is on a map. in the absence of a compass rose, north, south, west, east, you can presume that up is north. And then how many have we got on the other side? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And there are 9 accommodation buildings to the east of the reception. There's also been a pier built for boats to arrive at the island. This was built on the southern coast of the island. Most of the trees have been left, though there have been accommodation buildings built. The island appears to have kept its wooded areas. They haven't been touched. So there we've got comparison between past and now. So it was and is. If you had now and future, obviously you'd have to change the tenses a little. You'd have to say, at the moment, for now, there are just a few trees on the island and the beach on the western end. In the future, just like we're looking ahead with a graph, in the future, there are plans to build a reception building, a large restaurant, and both to the west and the east, there will be some accommodation buildings. And it is planned that a pier will be built. So all looking towards the future. So look carefully at those labels, the before and after, and the now and proposed or planned. That will dictate what tense you need to use. Okay, let's move on and have a look at another way of giving you data. These are called process flowcharts. Flowcharts are used by people who study business process to see what happens from one process to the next. So let's have a look at this. I'm going to start in the top left because it appears to be a break in this process. It seems a sensible place to begin. So mining of uranium ore. Okay. Milling uranium oxide. Okay. Then to conversion into uranium hexafluoride. You're not supposed to know what these mean. We can use the words from the diagram. Enrichment. I get the feeling that this is about something nuclear. Let's try. I'm going to ignore the bit on the right at the moment and continue the line round. So enrichment to fuel fabrication, uranium dioxide. Then commercial reactors for energy production. Yes, it's about nuclear reactors. Then reactors go to spent fuel. Tennessee Valley Authority, TVA, okay, they produce tritium. The TVA produces tritium. I know that's used in a different type of nuclear reaction, but it doesn't tell me here, so I can't mention that in my report. We just have to say the TVA produces 2 byproducts. That their main thing would be power, energy production, and there are 2 byproducts, spent fuel and tritium. Okay, so there we've got from mining to being processed, converted, enriched, sent to a reactor, used to produce power, electricity, energy, whatever you want to call it, and then the byproducts of spent fuel and tritium. Let's have a look at the sub-process out to the right. From the enrichment, there are products here. The product depleted uranium. We don't need to know what that's used for. We just have to know that that's a product of enrichment. Sometimes they will go back to be re-enriched. The tails go to re-enrichment. Sometimes they're just sent for storage. So there are 2 dotted lines. It's an alternative there. So that's fairly straightforward once we have a look at it. It's worth spending 2 or 3 minutes to get an overview of the data you're being presented with. Take a couple of minutes to look at that. And this goes from mining to fuel production to spent fuel. So we could talk about the stages in that. This is neither the past nor the future. This happens all the time. This process is an ongoing thing. They're mining and producing power all the time. So we'll use everyday tenses, but in a passive way. The passive tense would be things like, the uranium ore is mined, then it is milled into uranium oxide or yellow cake. The chemical formula is U2O, what is that? 6, U2O6. Then it is taken for conversion into uranium hexafluoride. I'm no nuclear expert, but all the vocabulary is given to us here. All we have to do is use English to connect these stages together and to get them to flow properly. So really, there's nothing to think about in any of these task ones. The information is given to us. All we're doing is explaining. You don't have to say everything that's happening. Just go for the main parts. Remember, whoever's reading it will have the diagram and is reading your report as an aid to understanding. It's not replacing the data, the diagram. They will have that as well. Okay, let's move on and see another type of diagram you might come across. I've called this a process flowchart. I've forgotten to change the label. This one is not a process chart. This is a cycle. This one is a cycle because it keeps going. It's not a raw product, a raw ingredient, and then changed into something which cannot go back. This keeps going. Other examples would be life cycle of a frog, perhaps. I'm sure when you did biology at school or college or university, you did life cycles in that sort of diagram. Popular ones would be the life cycle of a frog or the life cycle of a butterfly. They keep going. They're circular, which is why we call them cycles. But the way you talk about them is fairly similar to a process. All you have to do is break that circle, flatten it out, and you've got a process. You're still looking at it in step by step. And instead of a finished product, what you need to do is say, and then the process begins all over again. So the vocabulary that you need in this and the linking words are first, after that, next, finally, or penultimately, then finally, and then the process begins all over again. Again, we don't need to know the vocabulary. It's usually given to us, or it's so obvious that we don't need it. There would be no excuse for wrong spelling mistakes, wrong spellings on these. We've got photosynthesis spelt out for us. If we get that wrong, you lose big time for marks. So use the clues which are there, copy the words from them. Okay, let's have a look at another type of diagram. You may be given a table of figures. This table here, it's not very obvious what's happening here. We have to really look at tables. So what have we got? I can't see anything visual to tell me what trends or what direction this is going. So these are a bit tricky. So table of figures, hours of leisure time per year in some land. Okay, it's just an example. They've called a place some land. I see. It's split into teens, people in their 20s, in their 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s and over. So we haven't got kids in this. We haven't got under 12s. We've got from 13 to 19, then in 20s. So we're in blocks of age. And then down the left-hand side, we've got how leisure time is spent in a year. So teens watch 1,200 hours of TV or video, spend 150 hours socializing with four or fewer people, socializing with 4 or more people, 350 hours. Okay, so we can see down the left we've got what they do, the figures, the numbers in the body of the table. Those are the number of hours in 1 year, and the columns represent the age groups of the people in the study. Okay, I've got a clear idea what that is, but I still can't see an overall trend. I have to be very careful here what I say. Let's have a look. Okay, watching TV or videos is most popular with teens. Then it seems to tail off as you get older, as you in your 20s and 30s, it's reducing. Then it begins to come up again. So if you saw this as a line, it would go down, then up again. So 1200, 700, 400, now up to 500, 600, 700, nearly up to the teen figure, 1,100 hours for 70s and above. So you've got a V-shaped graph line, but you have to do a bit of visualizing, a bit of thinking for that. And IELTS know that, so the tables are normally not as complicated as other forms, other graphs and charts. So the tables will usually be easier to interpret because you haven't got visual clues. You can't see lines and bars. Okay, let's move on. So, task 1, writing. Why so many different ways of presenting statistics? Well, they do different things. It's not just because we like different patterns, different diagrams. They're doing different things. So if we have a look at our example of a line chart, a line graph, things like this show change over time, over a period of time. So this one, I think, went from 2012 to 2022, so a period of time of 10 years. So I like to think of this as like a video. It starts and shows a period of time and then stops. Now let's have a look at our pie chart. This shows the situation at one point in time. This was browser usage for April 2012. So the point in time might be a month long, might be a year long, but if it's just looking at what was in that point in time, I like to think of that as a photograph. That's one point, the situation on a day or a week or a month or a year. Usually as a percentage, because they treat the pie as 100%. There are other ways, but in IELTS it's usually a percentage. So those are the best ways to show change over time and one point in time. Now let's think about what I call the villain of the piece here, the one which can sometimes trick you. Bar chart. So let's have a look at this. That runs from 1992 to 2000. This is our bar chart with GDP. So bar charts showing change over time. So it's a bit like the line graph. Yeah? Be careful. Here's another bar chart. Let's have a look at this. No time. This is one point in time. So it shows data about one point in time. So what have we got? Males and females, blue and green. China, blue for the men, green for the women. So you've got, I see, right. These are percentages of students by males versus females in 6 different countries: China, Romania, Thailand, India, Russia, Vietnam. When is it? I don't know. Doesn't say. 1 point in time. So we'll have to just accept it, that this is the number as a percentage of students who can speak a foreign language in these countries. So what can we see here? What things could we write about in that? Can we see an overall trend? Not really, can you? Ah. Oh yes, I can see a bit of a pattern here. Look at the green figures. They're higher than the blue, aren't they? Most of the time. The place where I taught English for 10 years, Thailand, this is different. The males have got a higher figure. Percentage of students proficient in a foreign language. That's the only country where the male figure is ahead of the female figure. Okay. All the other countries, China, Romania, India, Russia, Vietnam, it's the other way round. Okay. Interesting. So be careful. A bar chart, a bar graph, sometimes called, they can trip you up. They're not always about the same thing. Okay. But you're better at this than you think, than you realize. Have a look at this chart. Blood pressure and pulse. Oh, systolic, mean, diastolic. It's this HR. Not sure what that one means. I don't know much about it. Oh, HR will be heart rate, won't it? That'll be the... Okay, I don't know much about that one, but I'm sure you do. This would make sense to you. How many of you could interpret this data and then hand over the patient to a new member of staff or a new shift? You would certainly have to mention some of the things on here. You would want to mention a spike on April the 1st between 9 a.m. and 6 p.m. There's a huge spike there. Don't know what that means, but you might say, oh, then we gave medication and the situation normalized. Then what happened on April the 2nd? Something happened there. There was some sort of crash, wasn't there? Heart rate went soaring and the other figures, the pressures, came down. So some sort of trauma there, something big happened, but then it normalized. But now, within the last few hours, between 7 a.m. and 7:15, look what happened. Boom. Those figures have dropped again. In fact, I think the patient may have died by the look of it. Wow, it's gone down. You know what this means. So I'm sure you can look at graphs and hand over or talk about data. This is all you're being asked to do, but just in a written report. So don't be scared of task one. Just first of all, take some time to understand what is it telling me? What trends can I see? And don't mention every plot on the graph. Don't say, oh, the figure was 19, then it went up to 21, then it went down to 18, then back up to 23. That's not what the test is about. The test is an overview and how you can make sense of trends and describing features and making comparisons. That's very important. So here's a typical question for you. I don't want you to do it now, but this is a typical question. An IELTS task one, you should spend about 20 minutes on this task, so it's reminding you what you've got to do. The pie charts below, so pie charts, there are two, show the proportion of students at a language school by native language for January and June of 2009. Okay, so we've got January and June, same year, and what is it doing? Pie charts show the proportion of students at a language school by native language. Ah, got it. This must be a record of what languages the students speak at home, their native language. So let's have a look. What's number one? Oh, number one is Arabic. Not surprising, lots of Arabic students from many countries. So they could come from a range of countries, all with Arabic as their native tongue. Okay. What's the next biggest group there? That seems to be the green one. Oh, South Korean. Okay. I see how this is working. If you have a look at these pie charts, you can see a number, then a comma, then a percentage. This is quite a common way of presenting it. So this language school had 73 Arabic-speaking students in January, which made up 31%. Yes, correct. 31% of the school figure. This figure dropped slightly in June, and there were 65 Arabic students, which made 27%. So we can do comparisons here. We've got 2 points of time. Remember, pie charts are 1 point in time. So we've got 2 of those. So here we can compare between January and June, looking at the main figures. So you'd certainly want to mention Arabic, South Korean, and then you'd start to think, how can we compare? So we need to write a report for a university lecturer describing the information shown below. Well, we wouldn't just go through and say, Arabic had X figure, South Korean had X figure. You would want to talk about them with a bit of meaning. So Arabic students had, and you could say approximately, twice as much as their next nearest rival, which was South Korean speakers. South Korean speakers were about 5% more than the next, which was Mandarin. Or you could say something like, Arabic was a large group, taking about 1/3 of the school numbers. So lots of ways you can present this data. You certainly be able to write 150 words with this amount of information. Okay. So looking at this in more detail, there are quite a number of plots. This is for one of the months. How could you compare these across? So let's have a look at the orange one. The orange segment, or the orange slice, that's Russian at 6%, 15 students. Just above the Russian, you've got, is it Turkish? Yes, the light blue one, Turkish. And that's at 32 students, or 13%. Now there's a place you could compare. You could say, what were the, yeah, Russian students were about half as many as Turkish students, or turned the other way, Turkish students were about twice as many as Russian students. Okay. Here's the next one in June 2009, slightly changed. You've got a huge increase in some. Arabic has dropped back. Arabic is now just over 1/4, but the Turkish speakers, they're closing the gap a little. So you could talk about the increase or the decrease between the time periods. Okay. But here's the most important thing which I can tell you. To get to band 7, you must do this. You must use the language of comparison. Do you remember the sentence from the beginning, which I said, remember this one? Let's see if you recognize it. Therefore, we can work out that task 1 is worth approximately half of task 2. Or in other words, task 2 is worth twice as much as task 1. So 2 examples of using the language of comparison there. You must compare where it's possible. Here's a very simple table of figures. We've got type of program, sport or news, and we've got men, hours per week, women, hours per week. So I guess this is TV programs, type of program, sports programs, news programs. Let's have a look. The men watch 6 hours of sport per week. Women watch 3 hours of sport per week. News stories, news programs. Men watch 7 hours. Women slightly less, 6.5 hours per week. So let's have a look at comparative sentences. And remember, to get to band 7, you must use comparative language. So looking at this table, we could say men watched twice as much sport as women. So we're comparing the figure for men with women, and we know that it's twice or double, if you like. Turn the other way around. Women watched 50% less sport than men. Okay. So we've got women 50% less, IS 3, which is 50% of 6. Okay. Men watched twice as much, 6, which is twice 3. Good. Or we could say it another way. Men watched more sport than women by a ratio of 2 to 1. Okay. So these sentences, they all compare. Now, I think Kate has got a poll ready for you. Kate will show a poll, and what I'd like you to do is decide which of the sentences is not a good one, is not a comparative one. So there are 3 sentences from an imaginary chart. Decide which one is not ticking the boxes for comparative. Okay, so Kate should be showing you the poll now. If you vote on that, and we'll come back to the results in a minute or two. Okay, let's have a look at the next part of this. We've looked at sport, so on the next slide, again, telling you it again, to get to band 7, you must compare. So let's look at news. News was 7 for men, 6.5 for women. So again, comparing, men and women watched roughly equal amounts of news. A half hour on 6 or 7 is roughly equal, or approximately equal amounts, if you like. Okay, that's one way to say it. There was virtually no difference in the hours of news watched between men and women. 30 minutes over 7 hours, not a lot of difference, so virtually no difference. Or men and women were within half an hour of each other in time spent watching news. Okay. So this sort of language is all you'd need to do to show that you're using language of comparison. Without it, doesn't matter how good it is, you cannot get 7. So it's crucial. So what else is the examiner looking for in a task 1? Well, he'd be looking for a logical split in the chunks of data you write about. Do you remember the chart which showed things going along nicely for 2 of them? 2 of them were showing an upward trend, whereas the bottom 2 crossed at one point and were up and down. So it would make sense to talk about the 2 which showed the same trend and the 2 which were different together. So if you talked about those together, the 2 at the top together, the 2 at the bottom together, you've split the chunks of data. You've split it into logical groups. Sometimes you might be able to do it with a simple men and women, like the language one we looked at. Men and women speaking of a foreign language in 6 countries. Or it might be geographically. You might have Northern Hemisphere or Southern Hemisphere, or it might be some sort of demographic split. By that I mean a geographical or economic label we can put to a country. So we might have developed countries and developing countries. We might have richer nations and poorer nations, depending what you see in the data. There are no right or wrong answers. The examiner is just looking for you not to try and bite the whole thing in one, but to split it into chunks and talk about it in sensible sized pieces of data. Not individuals, but grouped together into sensible groups. You also need to show that you can see a recognition of trends. Obviously, this doesn't work with cycles and processes and maps, but in all the graphical things, even point in time, you should be able to see some sort of trend if you've got 2 to compare. You need to show the highlights of the data. If there's a particularly high figure or a particularly low figure, or one of the lines crosses over, if Honda suddenly overtake Toyota in sales, you need to talk about the point at which that happened, when one overtook another, if you like. So the highlights of the data, probably a good idea to have a base figure where it began and where it ended up, and any high and low points, anything which is unusual. If it just goes up by the same amount each month, just say the whole data set showed an upward trend. No need to tell me each individual plot. You can see that by looking at the diagram. You're looking to give an overview, a report for your educated reader. And this is important, so I'm going to repeat it. Comparison of like data. So you can't compare apples with oranges, but you can compare 2 types of oranges or 2 types of apples. Cooking apples and eating apples, red apples and green apples. They're comparable. So don't go looking to compare change over time with point in time. You cannot do it. When you've got data sets like that, you'll have to compare within the pie chart or within the graph. Okay, so basically that's what we're looking at for task 1. Make sure you can compare the data. Let's have a look at this this example here. Spend about 20 minutes on this task. Always a little reminder for you. The diagrams below give information on transport and car use in Edmonton. Okay, so we've got a table of figures and we've got a pie chart. Can we compare these 2 sets of data? Summarize the information by selecting and reporting the main features and make comparisons where relevant. Oh, we've got a reminder in the question. We've got to make comparisons. I can't. They're not the same. Oh, I can't do comparisons in this one. If that's what you get to, you then have to begin to look at comparing within each set. So compare within the pie chart or compare within the table. So let's have a look. What could we say about the pie chart? Okay. So the blue and the grey one, or it's light purple, isn't it? The blue and the light purple represent buses and taxis. So you could say buses and taxis have exactly the same figure at 10%. By far the largest, being 10% more than its nearest rival, is car, or the use of cars. At 10% less, step that, is LRT, and then explain that, which is light rail transit system. Or you could say buses and taxis together make up 20%, while LRT is at 15% higher at 35%. A further 10% higher at 45% are cars. So you've compared those. So long as you're mentioning the two things in the same sentence, you've compared them. Not just the figures, not just cars were 45, LRT was 35. That's not comparison. You need it to compared with. This was more, this was less, compared with another one. So let's have a look at the table. This is splitting the car journeys, the 45% of journeys which were by car. It's splitting it now, the reason for using the car. So commute to work, 55% suggested that was one of the things they used. 15% said they used for shopping. 30% taking children to school. 27% business. So if we added all these together, that's more than 100%. Some of the people must do two things. Some of them must commute to work and go shopping. Not in the same day, but they've ticked shopping as being one of the reasons they use the car in the city. So what can we compare here? Okay, well, we've got business, taking children to school, 30 and 27. Within 3%, that's more or less the same, so roughly equal. Shopping, it's about half, isn't it? So shopping was half as popular as taking children to school, or 50% more people used the car to take children to school than to do shopping. And by far the largest was the commute to work. Okay. So how can we prepare ourselves to get more examples on task 1? SLC have got a great deal of help available. We've got a vast bank of material which you can access. The guided e-learning system, which has got a huge section on IELTS, that's available for you. Some of you have opted for email support, some of you for, like we're doing now, face-to-face, but using the computer. Some of you, I know, are going to have small groups. So there's a various selection of things which IELTS get, which SLC can help your IELTS with. So right now, I'd like to ask, do you have any questions about today? So I'll put questions open. I'll stop sharing my PowerPoint, and now I can see my poll. Okay, let's just have a look at this. I asked which of these was the weakest way to talk about two or more categories in a diagram. Toyota sold 26,000 units over the period and Honda sold 21,000 cars in the same period. 94% of you said that A was it. 6% each. Well, that's good. Exactly the same for Toyota and Honda. 6% opted for one or other of those. Let's have a look. Which of these is a good sentence from the point of view of comparison? Toyota sold 5,000 more cars than Honda over the period of, and then over the period of the graph. Honda's sales were 5,000 less than Toyota over the year. Okay, these directly compare Honda and Toyota. Or do they? Toyota sold 5,000 more cars than Honda over the period of. So look at those. Toyota sold 26,000 units over the period and Honda sold 21,000 cars in the same period. So 94% of you fell into the trap of going for the long sentence with the good grammar. Only 1 out of 16 people who voted thought it was those. So which is the weakest? That would be the weakest because it doesn't compare, does it? it looks like a good sentence, but no matter how good your sentence is, it's not going to get up to 7. It won't get to 7, 7.5, the figures you need. It doesn't compare. So that's the weakest one. Well done. Now, any questions? What have we got in the chat? Let's have a look. Thanks for all your answers earlier. Don't know why I couldn't see those earlier. Yeah, the questions I was asking early. Okay, great. Now, any questions for me? If you could type them into the chat box, we'll be able to answer questions you have on today's session. Oh, no questions. There's one in Q&A, okay. Is it all right to use directions such as left and right in maps? Not to get 7. As I said earlier, if you don't have a compass rose, which tells you north, south, west, east, and so on, if you don't have one of those, presume that the top is north. Maps are usually oriented in that direction. If you put left and right, it shows that you're not aware of map conventions. So you could say to the right of the town hall, I guess. But for bigger map directions, you want to use the compass points. So thank you for that. So another one in Q&A. Got that one. Millicent said letter B is a better comparison of data compared to letter C. I'm not sure that letter C was showing in the full sentence. I think it went on to say a bit more, or B against C. But yes, agree with that one. Any other questions in the chat? Let's have a look. No. Okay. Well, it just remains that I see that our hour's up, so it just remains. Oh, here's a question. Here's a quick question for you from. What if we did not reach the minimum number of words, but the writing is excellent? We used comparisons. Can we still have a band score of 7? That's a great question. The minimum word count is there because you're going to need to fully describe what's in the graph. 150 words is about the minimum you'd need. If you don't use 150 words, you probably haven't covered as much as you need to. You're right, the writing could be excellent. You may have made comparisons, but there'll be something missing. 150 words is not much. And IELTS recognizes that, and there is a penalty. If you're less than 150 words, no matter how good the grammar and the rest of the writing, half a band score comes off. So if you wrote at band 7, but you only wrote 140 words, that's a 6.5, I'm afraid. So the minimum is there because it has to be set somewhere. 150 is seen as the minimum number of words to fully complete the task. So what would happen? You'd lose half a band score. Great question, thank you. Here we are. Is it okay to give a conclusion for writing part 1? Naomi, that is a good question too. Why would you? I know that it's very popular at review schools in the Philippines to insist that you write one, but the examiner's not looking for one. It's not necessary. There are not enough words in 150. If I was to write a conclusion, I could take 150 words for a conclusion. So don't bother. When we come to do a session on task 2, I'm also going to talk a little more about conclusions and why you don't need one in 1, but you definitely do need one in 2. So thanks for that. Good question. Is it okay to give a conclusion? Yeah, if you've got time, but you certainly don't need one. You wouldn't lose marks for task completion if you didn't have one. And I suggest if you've got time to write a conclusion, you've missed something in the body. Okay, thanks, Naomi. Let's see, one more. No, that one's gone. Okay, I can't see any more new questions in chat. Oh, one more in Q&A. Right. Which is much better, giving a conclusion or an overview? Xavier, oh, long time since I've spoken to you, Xavier. Hello. Which is better, giving a conclusion or an overview? For task 1, you won't need a conclusion. An overview is essential. Without an overview, you haven't completed the task. So I've got to say overview very clearly. An overview is essential. A conclusion is nice if you've got time, but not necessary. If you're going to choose one, overview every time. Thanks for your question. Okay, I think. Oh, you're welcome, Xavi. Okay. Okay, if I don't see any more in the chat, then I think we've had our time. So just remains for me to say thank you very much. Look out for another webinar in a couple of weeks to help you along the way. And I've no doubt I'll meet many of you either through email or in a Skype, in a Zoom session. Okay, thank you very much for tuning in, and I'll see you soon. Bye-bye.